In 1534, Henry VIII visited this manor house in Buckinghamshire, the first of many visits by the king and his daughter Elizabeth. But the owner knew that the royals expected only the biggest and the best, so he had his home transformed into a palace. But magnificent though this Tudor building is, it's hardly big enough to support the king and his entourage of over 300 courtiers. It must have been at least twice this big. So where's the rest of it? And what exactly does it take to build a house fit for a king? As usual, we've got just 3 days to find out. A historical document mentions a wing measuring 9 chambers from the church to a gatehouse. This could either run along the north or the east of the courtyard, with either one containing the grand gatehouse entrance. Jonathan's preferred option is 2 wings with the gatehouse to the east, giving us a palace large enough for a king and his entourage.
We're talking about a house that Henry VIII visited and Elizabeth, up to 1,000 people descending on it for periods up to a couple of weeks or more. It must have been a very big complex with lots of supporting structures. So my neat vision might be much more complex in reality.
Mick, how do we explode Jonathan's cosy vision of what this place would have looked like?
Well, I think we can look, the 2 wings that are on there that don't exist today, we can have a look at those by putting some trenches across and see if there is any walls in the bottom of them. But of course, the building itself is a piece of archaeology, and it's full, just by looking around the outside, of clues of where walls have joined on, windows have been altered. So there's a sort of 3-dimensional jigsaw to sort out of the building itself,
Absolutely
isn't there?
there is, yeah.
I want to know what the difference is going to be between this painting and what we finally come up with.
Let's get on then.
And so our first trench goes in based on Jonathan's recreation. Here on the proposed eastern wing, close to where he believes there was a grand gatehouse. You're a bit previous, aren't you? We haven't even got the geophys results yet.
Yeah, but I don't think it'll matter, actually. We've got a lot of clues as to what might be going on here. We know about these 2 wings, and we can see where that step is there by the fire alarm.
There's different sorts of brickwork there, aren't there?
There's all sorts of stuff going on. We're going to have to spend a lot of time looking at that, because for now it just tells us something's coming off in this direction.
As well as rediscovering this structure and the rest of the palace, we hope to find out why much of this complex disappeared over the centuries. Because historical records show it was large and grand enough to play host to Henry 3 times and Elizabeth twice, a place where they and their entourage could rest, feast and hunt. The house's high status was due to one man, the first Earl of Bedford, John Russell, who had a meteoric rise through the Tudor court.
He was in the service of a man called Sir Richard Jerningham, who was one of Wolsey's key officials. Now, what's important about that is that when Jerningham died, Sir John Russell not only, if you like, stepped into Jerningham's job, he also stepped into his bed, he married his widow.
That was Anne Sapcott, who inherited Chenies.
And that's how he got Chenies. But that coincided with Henry VIII taking Russell into the Privy Chamber. He was a gentleman of the Privy Chamber in 1526. Now, he was one of only 8 people in the country who were allowed to touch the king, and even one of those 8, the barber, was only allowed to touch him when the king specifically invited him to do so. So Russell is one of those very key courtiers at the very heart of the Tudor court.
So really you could say that Russell was one of the 8 most important men in the country at that time.
Absolutely. Now, but what Henry also does is he gives him a wedding present, and he gives him the Manor of Amersham next door. And that gives him the money to build at Chenies.
Oh, crikey, yeah, look at that.
It looks like we've got... See that? There's a mortar surface there.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's the holes in the ground that will confirm or sink Jonathan's theory.
You must be inside a building.
Hang on, why do you say that that's a floor?
It's a laid mortar surface. It's very compact. It's evenly distributed. It's laid on these bits of these brick surface. It may have had a tiled floor actually on the top of it, which they lifted off, but that what you're looking at is actual foundation surface for a floor, I think.
And they've got something else over there, haven't they?
Now, this is really the good stuff. Look, we've got these mortared bricks in here, but look, it's bang on line with the end of the wing.
Lines up exactly,
where we want
doesn't
it to be.
Why couldn't that be 21st century?
It could be. I mean, there's still a lot of demolition rubble about it, but that looks to me Tudorish. I mean, one piece of pot does not make a period.
Yeah.
But it I would have thought we could be looking at that sort of
It's
period.
almost like that Cistercian ware, isn't it? Which is that sort of very dark green stuff, you know. Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, there's our first bit of Tudor.
Jolly good?
Early days yet, Tony?
Yeah.
The evidence does suggest this wall is Tudor, which, going by Jonathan's theory, means we should be close to the sort of grand gatehouse you'd expect at the entrance to a royal residence. But just as one piece of pot doesn't make a period, one wall doesn't make a wing. So we're putting in another trench to find the other side of our possible gatehouse wing. Trench 2 has also come up with the goods, and it's even more substantial than the wall in Phil's trench.
Okay, well, that's wallish, isn't
It's
it?
very wallish. Got the wall up here, and we've even got some flint footings, which, you know,
Fairly typical, aren't they? Local resources, chalk and flint.
Absolutely,
Good stuff. Good
yeah.
for the Chilterns, yeah.
Not only does this feature line up with the existing Tudor wall by the church, there's even some traces of plaster on it, suggesting this could be the inside of our northern wing.
Here's our Tudor wall, and that does line up exactly on the end of the building. We still don't really know whether we are in a building or, as this material here, this gravel material, might suggest that we're actually into a courtyard surface. The other problem, of course, is that we've got these walls here, and we don't know, again, whether they're a building or whether they're garden features. The trouble is that they've been so smashed around that we got no idea where the floor levels were. We've got the Tudor wall there coming off. Now, what we don't know is whether it's a building, a structure, or whether it's just a boundary wall.
If we go back a little bit, what we're starting to see is a wall running flush, so it's more like a boundary wall. If we go back even further, it shows even clearer this strong wall all the way running across the front.
It does suggest that that wall is no more than a boundary wall rather than a structure.
Yeah, you can't really see any structures.
It's still a bit confusing.
It is, isn't it? I mean, I'd like a painting from the other side.
That's yeah. You haven't got one of those?
No, not at all.
We just don't have any evidence here to back up Jonathan's original theory for a gatehouse. Although the wall may once have been part of a larger wooden structure, for example, a gallery leading to the church. But it does mean our straightforward plan for this site is unravelling in front of our eyes. Hopefully this trench behind the garden wall will find the other side of the northern wing. But just to confuse matters, geophys have discovered these anomalies in the courtyard, suggesting two completely different shapes and sizes of that northern wing. And that means we'll need to dig 2 more trenches to test their results. And if that's not complicated enough, we seem to have lost the east wing entirely. The Archaeology and Archives now suggesting it was just a boundary wall. In the midst of all this contradiction and confusion, Stuart has been fertling around the site in his own inimitable fashion. And he now believes these massive earthworks to the north of the site could be the remains of the formal Tudor gardens.
It's got mortar in it, hasn't it? Are there any bricks in it anywhere?
There is a little bit further up. We've got brickwork.
Slowly but surely, Stuart's evolving his own very different theory as to the whereabouts of the Grand Palace. Plus, the records show it was also at the very heart of a royal scandal.
Henry was showing off Catherine Howard. She was his trophy wife. He wanted everybody to see her. I mean, the irony is, of course, that a week later, she is denounced for adultery. And in fact, there is also evidence in the National Archives that while at Chenies, you know, she was engaged in a liaison with Thomas Culpeper.
Oh, really? Actually, here?
Absolutely here, yes, because the evidence against her actually mentions Chenies.
If you're approaching from that direction, you're going to approach from the back end of the church.
Yeah.
That's going to be the first thing you see, the rear of it.
Yeah.
And why would you want to approach from the back of the church? It seems just to turn its back on everything. You want to celebrate this building.
It's halfway through day 2, and we've got almost nothing to show for it. But that suddenly changes when we get the dendro dates for the west and south wings.
This bit here comes much later, in the summer of 1550.
Hang on, whoa. When did Henry VIII come and stay here?
1540, 34 and 41.
41.
And we've been
this isn't even
assuming...
Henry VIII's reign. This is not part of Henry VIII's reign in that case.
We've been assuming that this is the constant. This is the reason that we came here, because we'd got a bit of the place where Henry VIII stayed.
So the building is elsewhere?
Yeah, the buildings that Henry saw
Are elsewhere.
are elsewhere, although he did see this one behind me.
So this wing on which we've based so much of our digging strategy wasn't even built until after Henry VIII's death. And that means we can turn this dig on its head, distilling a new layout for the house. And this is it. With the main entrance to the west and a grand set of lodgings to the north overlooking terraced gardens, which is where our new trench will go in. Unfortunately, it's in the most inappropriate spot on the whole site, jammed in between a wall and our portable toilets. Ah, the glamour of archaeology.
I mean, look, you've got Queen Elizabeth comes and stays here for a month in 1570 and visits it repeatedly. She loves the old rambling house. We've got details about her secretary saying, it's not in a decent state for her to come and stay. You know, we've still got a Tudor monarch staying here. It's just a different Tudor monarch.
Yes, if you can loosen this lot up, that'll be a lot easier.
Over at the portable toilets, it seems that the doubting Thomases were right. Within inches of the concrete surface, Phil's uncovered some tantalising remains.
So what do you reckon then, Jonathan? Is it Tudor?
Well, what I can say is this, that all the characteristics are there for it to be generically Tudor. I mean, it's inevitably difficult...
What do you mean, generically
Well,
Tudor?
because each site has its own brick firing clamps and, you know, reuses material. It's set in soft lime mortar in the right way, the bricks are roughly the right size, and they seem to be making an English bond, which is the pattern of having the ends of the bricks all in a row, the sides all in a row, alternate, and they get fed up with that by about the middle of the 17th century, so it's good.
It looks like we may be finally in the right place. And surprisingly, it does tie in with our new plan for the site.
What we've got here is the wall of a narrow range of buildings which led from the chapel at one end with the hall and the big house at that end.
Why do you say a narrow range?
Well, it's like a corridor, because this being one side of it, we're on the outside, that's on the inside, and where that wall is there...
This one here?
Yeah, that's on top of what we think might be a Tudor wall underneath. We can't prove, that's speculation, but we haven't found any evidence of any buildings over there. If I try it on here for you.
Hang on, where are we?
We're stood about here at the moment.
Yeah.
What we seem to have is a wall that came off the end of there to close a courtyard. And here we have a corridor, a narrow corridor range coming down here to join the chapel there.
Yeah.
That would link into where the hall was, there. And then coming off from there would be this big fine building that we've been looking for. This is the bit that connects the big smart house with the chapel at this end.
It might not be as glamorous as we'd expected, but this narrow range is the one that features in the 1585 inventory, running from the church to the grand building Phil's digging, replacing Jonathan's original theory of a quadrangle building for this new layout. A layout that now seems to be confirmed by Phil's trench, where this wonderful bay window has been unearthed.
So we've got a group of bay windows on that north side looking down onto the gardens.
Which is all the terraced area?
Yeah.
Right.
We also think we've now found the main entrance to the complex, which includes some of this standing building.
Jonathan's thinking seems to be that we've got the gatehouse is actually not a building with a tunnel under it and arches, which is what my initial thought
That's what
was.
I've been thinking of for 3 days.
More likely a couple of buildings either side of a passageway, which would have been cobbled, of which that's one, and the other one probably ought to be somewhere here.
But the only way we can be sure we've got the right dimensions is to dig and geophysics this whole farmyard. So bish-bosh here and bish-bosh over there?
I would have thought so, yeah.
There's a lot to do with just a day to go. Our new plan may be causing headaches for the archaeologists, but it's completely transformed our understanding of the archives.
This is a cracking piece of archaeology, isn't it?
Thank you, Mick.
It really is. Do we understand it now?
I think we actually do. I think what you're looking at here is the front facade of the Royal Lodges. We think it's actually built in probably 2 phases. They put up one skin of bricks and then added. But the most obvious thing are these 2 bay windows, one there and one over there, which they've actually added on to the front of the building.
So it's got a whole series of glass windows up the front of it.
It really shows how important this is. And we checked this out. It could have been a garderobe. Turns out that, in fact, it is just a massive bay window.
Yeah. We've had glass out of here as well.
Oh,
so
right.
Anyway, once we come into the building, we've got a room on that side and a room on that side.
So a partition wall down the middle.
Well, it's more than a partition. Look at the size of it. Look at the
It's
foundations.
as big as the outer wall, isn't it?
And you see here, look, you see we've got a whole series of these little niches cut into that wall. Now, I reckon that's where the flooring joist would have been. So if you allow for the flooring joist and allow for the floorboards on the top, I reckon that floor level is about here, and you would have looked out down over the valley.
So it would work out to be about 30 foot in depth, and you could say it is literally palatial.
We may not have found a Tudor ensuite bathroom, but these remains show the sheer scale of the apartments that would have greeted the royal entourage. This new layout has got one final treat in store for us. After careful measurement and cross-referencing with the 1585 inventory, it seems we may have stumbled across the bedchamber of a certain Henry VIII.
By 1541, when Henry came here, he had a badly ulcerated leg, and he wasn't as mobile. And in fact, he would have stayed in this building on the ground floor, not the first floor, as a monarch would normally have done.
Why's that?
Well, we think that because when Henry VIII's bed was actually given away by the second Earl of Bedford in 1585, it was actually on the lower floor, in the lower chamber. Now, the royal bed was absolutely huge. You didn't just bring it into the room, it was probably built inside the room and wouldn't go out through the door.
It's bizarre, isn't it, that we're in this old bus, and yet at some time in history, King Henry VIII might have been just here, gazing out into the garden with his suppurated leg.
Well, I think that's entirely possible.
And this would have been just one small part of the fair lodgings that Sir John Russell had built for his royal visitors. Because wedged between the dining bus and the portable toilets, geophys have been able to confirm Stuart's suggested extent of the missing Tudor range.
As we get up to the line, there's a definite response where the front wall is.
We've got a clear demarcation there.
Right.
And that lines up perfectly.
Oh, excellent.
That's
with the
Phil's
walls
excavation
in Phil's
walls,
trench going through there. Possible back wall at that point there, running through. Just this side of the bus.
Under the concrete.
So if we hadn't have parked the dining bus there, we might have been able to have a look at it.
And yet all that now remains of this grand palace is a beautiful fraction of its former glory. This is the story of a grand medieval house turned into a palace fit for a king. Its facade further embellished with modish and very impressive bay windows by the time of Queen Elizabeth's month-long stay in 1570. And dendrodating shows that by this time they'd also added another wing to the south of the complex. In every respect, this house reflects the very pinnacle of the power and wealth of the Earls of Bedford, its Tudor owners.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
Imagine I'm a Georgian gentleman. I've just come from nearby fashionable Bath in order to visit Hun Street, one of the largest and most opulent mansions of the Georgian era. And no, it's not that. That's just the lodge. This grand design was the dream of local MP Francis Popham, who tragically never lived to see it realised. In fact, despite millions of pounds being spent on it, we don't know if it was even finished. 200 years later, all that's left of it is this portico. All the rest of it's somewhere underneath these stables. But the extraordinary thing is that apart from a couple of pretty little pictures, we don't know anything about it. We don't know who designed it, what it looked like inside, or even if anyone ever lived in it. There have been mansions at Hun Street since medieval times. Sir John Popham, one of the most important figures of Elizabeth I's court, acquired the estate in the 16th century. But it was his descendant Francis who built the last, and legend would have it, grandest mansion of them all. So is that portico there, that bit here?
That's it. This blown-up painting shows it nicely, doesn't it?
How long would this north front have been?
Well, in the 1920s, there's a particularly dry summer, and they recorded that the parch marks on the ground here were 200 feet wide by 120, and took that to be the side walls of the house.
That's 1, 2, 3. This is all looking a bit too easy. The eastern facade should be 100 feet away from the centre of the portico. Have you done the geophys for this area yet?
Of course we have.
And have you hit anything that might be our east wall?
Well, look at these results. The red line is actually that theoretical line at 100 feet. You can see this very clear black line right on the edge of our survey grid.
I tell you why I'm concerned, John. You see, this looks like a perfectly regular rectangular pile, doesn't it? But relative to the portico there, this thing's coming out at a cranky angle.
Yeah, it might just be the effect of the results, but I think the only way is we've got to dig it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, because if we can actually pick up something really distinctive like this doorway, then from that we could extrapolate where the front wall and the back wall's going to be.
I mean, the other thing is, there's also this feature in the data. That might just be a ditch. Now, whether that's related to the house or an earlier phase of activity, I think it's worth looking at that as well.
Yeah. So in goes Trench 1 to locate the eastern facade.
Whoa, 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 that looks like a big bit of building, that does. That's the sort of stuff I'd have expected the building to be made of, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Mind your knees.
Manganese?
No, mind your knees.
Manganese.
Ah.
Oh.
Here, Francis. Now that looks like that mortar, look. That is that same mortar. That is exactly that same mortar as is over there.
On the portico?
That is. Go on then, John. Where's this on the geophysics?
Oh, well, I said it was.
Yeah, but I thought you said it was right at the end of the track.
No, look, you can see it. 2 metres in.
2 metres in.
2 metres? Oh, well, there you go then.
That's it?
That is it then.
It's still the first hour of the dig, and already it looks like we're onto the eastern facade of Francis Popham's grand mansion, a building project clearly intended to show off the family's status. You know how if you're building your own place and you run out of money, you park a caravan on site and rough it for a few months? Well, this is the Popham's version of that caravan. The lodge that Francis Popham built was up on the hill overlooking the moated medieval mansion, which we believe he demolished to make way for his new house. If there was a perfectly serviceable medieval building here anyway, why do you think Francis Popham spent so much money on building a new place?
Well, the 18th century is a century of improvement, and that's a key word. And people want to improve their estates. They want to prove their taste and their culture. And one of the ways that you do that is by building or rebuilding. And so putting up a new house or refronting an old house was very, very typical.
Back on site, Phil's discovered a gravel surface beside the wall line.
That looks like burnt flint.
Oh, it does look like burnt flint.
That looks like a yard surface.
Well, that shit
it's got
is.
bits of pottery, Welsh slate, charcoal.
Yeah, I mean, it goes right the way across, doesn't it?
Yeah. Have your trowel, mate.
Thank you.
A yard surface up against what looks like a wall suggests that we have found the eastern facade. But it's a bit nearer the portico than recorded parch marks had led us to believe. And now Jonathan's noticed that something about the portico doesn't quite add up.
All of the illustrations show 17 bays wide, so 17 windows.
Yeah.
So if each of these then should be 12 feet wide,
and
as
they're about
5 of the 17, this should be 60 feet long in all. But it looks to me like it's shrunk
It's
by
about
well
half
over...
size, isn't
It
it?
is about half size.
Something's clearly wrong. We need to work out if it's just the portico that's small or the whole house. So in goes Trench 2 to find the south-east corner of Hun Street Mansion. The thing about Georgian buildings is that they conform to various architectural patterns and are therefore easy to date.
I think that that's banked against the wall.
Something's not quite right about Hun Street, and it looks like we're going to have to rely on the archaeology to shed a little light. Phil expands his trench to find out if the wall thickens out enough to support 3 stories.
Well, that's it. And that's it there. So, we got close on 2 metres of it. It's looking thicker.
I walk into the house, I'm confronted by this spectacular 8-sided room. I go upstairs, what do I see then?
What you would have seen is a series of interconnecting rooms, because country houses by this time were made up of, at the top level, for entertaining. So they had rooms that connected one into the other, so you went from one into a slightly grander room into a slightly grander room. For instance, we know that there's a coved room that had 76 squares of blue tiling, and then you would have eventually got your way into the grand or great salon, and that would have been the room that you used for displaying your pictures, but it would also have been your ballroom.
These regular layouts should help us to reconstruct the inside of Hun Street Mansion. And we're beginning to get details from inside a room in the eastern corner. Before we can get going, Rakshas discovered a corner 2 metres away from the wall line on the geophysics. It lines up with the corner bridge found yesterday, so we're going to open up a huge trench right across the eastern wing to work out what Rakshas wall is and to get inside some of the rooms of the Georgian mansion. Geophysics are now trying to locate the west wing under the stables. In the eastern corner, we're digging through tons of rubble in what could be the mansion's cellars. And Matt's been investigating the flinty surface running outside the east wall.
We appear to have this feature or ditch or something. Starts here, where it's cut by this wall, and goes a good, 1.5 metres behind me there. So that's way too big for a construction cut for this wall, I think. So what I'm thinking is it might be maybe a part of the earlier moat, maybe. And it's cutting through all this stuff on the outside of the building. You see, you've got this kind of gravelly stuff here, and there's something linear going along there.
Woohoo! How about that for a wall, then?
Back on site, Phil's found another wall.
What do you think of that, then? That's a wall and a half, isn't it?
But it's much fatter than anything else we've seen.
What's think of that, then?
Bloody hell.
That's the other edge of it, look. That is a hell of a width, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Compared with everything else we've had.
It's twice the width.
Oh, stone me, that is a wall.
Running parallel, the thin outer wall turns a corner and kinks out to form one of 3 equal bays. Records suggest that our local builder never finished the west wing, most of which lies under the stable itself, where we can't touch it. But Jonathan thinks he's found a bit we can get at in the northwest corner of the building. So in goes Trench 4.
That's the face there.
And the best bits were sold off to Prior Park.
Well, that is nice.
The General left the portico as a relic of his uncle's grand design, while his family made the lodge their home.
Well, we got our sill, look here.
Phil's trench is now too deep to work in, but he's determined to get to the bottom of his basement room.
Oh, look at that. Is that look like you plaster to you?
It does, yes.
I mean, if I can hook that away, awkwardest form of digging I've ever done. I'm sure that is a plastered surface there.
It's looking like it, isn't it?
Oh, look. Come here. Am I right in thinking that there's a line comes up through there?
Yeah.
Does that mean that's where the window's going to be then?
So it seems that there were windows looking over a dry moat running around the eastern wing, up to the mysterious corner where Jonathan thought we'd found a medieval chapel.
Well, I've been slapped round the face by the wet haddock of reality, haven't I? Because this felt like a medieval building. See what I mean? Those corner sort of seem like buttresses. But I don't mind at all, because if what I'm reading is right, is that stub there built into the corner?
Yeah, it's all part of the same thing. You can just see there's a vertical face down the bottom there, and you've got another one going along there.
That's fine. You're on the corner of that big wing that extends down to Phil's trench. And if that wall, the small one, is built into it, and it returns around this way and it's built into this corner, then we've got the same wall being built into both the wing and the moat wall at the same time. It's the same build, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Right.
This requires a major rethink. And it's now clear that the outside wall was built at the same time as the parapet wall. The question now is when, and right at the end of the day, Jonathan's found the answer.
This room now, we're past the rubble and we're on to the details which really reveal the period it was built in. And you can see the plaster lining there, squeezed between what were once wooden uprights against the wall. Some of it was panelled on this downstairs room, stores, scullery, kitchens, that sort of area. All that's typical of the 17th century. In the smart rooms, it might be coloured with tapestry. Down here, those cheap materials are well done for the kitchen staff.
Seems to me that after 3 days, we haven't discovered a Georgian mansion at all.
150 years after this was built, the Georgians slapped a bit of lipstick on it. That's basically it.
So it's a bit of Georgian cladding?
Yeah.
So Francis Popham's doomed grand design turns out to be the last flourish of a family intent on building ever more impressive houses. Sir John Popham acquired Hun Street's medieval manor around 1600 and constructed a new house befitting a Lord Chief Justice. But around the time of the Civil War, the next generation of Pophams built another house, the one we've uncovered. And over a century later, Francis spent a fortune refacing the outside of the house, lavishly remodelling the inside and transforming Hun Street's gardens. But to finish it was too expensive a proposition for his nephew, who eventually pulled it down and moved into the lodge.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Look at that, one of the finest manor houses in Britain. Look at this map the archaeologists drew. There's the house, here's the moat, and does it go up to here and then turn around the house? No, it goes hurtling off in that direction. This is the direction the moat's going in, but what on earth's going on? What's it protecting? Well, there have been several theories, from a Roman fort to a royal court, from a chapel to a heavily fortified cattle enclosure. And we've got just 3 days to rip up this field and find out what this has got to do with that. Llancaiach is just north of Cardiff, sitting on a plateau of land in the middle of the rolling South Wales valleys. The earthworks we're here to investigate were first recorded in the 1970s, but so far all attempts to establish exactly what they are have failed.
Where he's coming in now is where that ditch was shown coming through there.
But it makes sense to assume they've got something to do with next-door Llancaiach Manor, where the powerful Pritchard family once entertained Charles I. And the manor itself, now a museum and education centre, is also a bit of a mystery, because no one knows if it was the first house to be built on this site. So, do we have an earlier moated house, or even a Roman fort in this enormous field? It's a big question, and for once we're not waiting for Geophys to answer it.
There are definite earthworks there, definite earthworks.
Because some of the team have decided to break with tradition and open a trench immediately. Look at that, not only a trench, but a big one. Here are the three wise monkeys of archaeology. Ben, how come we got a trench in already?
Well, Stuart had a wander about this morning and he picked up these very low earthworks, but they seemed to line up with a possible moat, so we thought we'd go for it. We couldn't wait any longer.
A couple of years ago, they put a trench across where they think the earthworks were, and they found 2 rows of stones, 2 sort of banks of stones with a post hole in the middle. Until we open up a bigger area, we won't know whether we can identify these stone rows, whether we can find any more post holes. We've got to think big.
Surely this is going to be the easiest dig we've ever done. There's the house, there's the moat, something in the middle, bosh, go home.
Yeah, except the term moat on an Ordnance Survey map covers a multitude of sins.
What does he mean?
Well, all it means really is that somebody's seen a bit of a depression. I mean, first of all, what is a moat? It could mean a water-filled ditch, it could just mean a dry ditch, it could be something that's functional, defensive, it could be for fish, it could just be something that looks nice in your grounds. I mean, we've got no idea what this thing is until we dig it.
So our first trench has gone in over the tantalisingly visible bit of the L-shaped earthworks that everyone is calling a moat.
In this first trench is always so important. I reckon you learn more from that first trench than you do all the other ones you put through. It gives you that first impression of the site.
We suspect this earthwork may only be one corner of a much larger feature with some potentially stunning archaeology in the middle. We need to find out as much as we can about the house. And the most obvious thing about Llancaiach Manor is that it's a house of wealth and power. Which is probably not that surprising, considering it belonged to a powerful Welsh dynasty called the Pritchards. I know it's early days yet, but what do you think might be the relationship between this house and that field?
If we've got what looks to be a moated enclosure that's heading out across the field, it's always made me wonder whether there's the possibility that there's an earlier building that's there. We just need to try and see if we can find it.
So could our potential moat enclose the ancestral home of the Pritchard family? Well, archaeological digs have shown time and time again that posh houses are built on top of or next to slightly less posh houses belonging to an earlier generation of the family. And it seems unlikely that a house as grand as the current Llancaiach was the first to be built on this site.
It's as though you might have had a big post in there.
Yeah.
And Ben and Phil have now hit the first evidence of the mysterious earthworks that promise so much.
That bank out there is one row of stones. This could be the post hole in the middle.
Yeah.
And then we go that way and we have another row of stones, which is the other bank. Who knows, geophysics might be able to track it all the way across.
It's lunchtime day one. We've put in our first trench. It was over where this moat-like feature is supposed to be, and sure enough, it's there. But the problem with this moat on the maps is that it looks vaguely L-shaped, nothing more. But now John has done the geophys. Is everything clear?
As clear as mud.
What do you mean?
Well, I've got an old stream bed for you. Ridge and furrow ploughing, a few lines, nothing that looks like a moat ditch, and I can't see any evidence for an enclosure.
I think we now know even less about this site than we did when we got here. Look at that. Looks like someone sneezed on it in black and white.
Yeah, that's not quite the idea of geophysics, is it? There's nothing in this trench that looks terribly moat-like, and it ought to be here. There's no moat.
Oh dear. So the moat, the reason we came here, doesn't exist. But all due credit to John, the geophys has thrown up something unexpected that has got Ben and the team intrigued.
There's some sort of linear feature, a ditch or something like that, running up here, turning a corner and coming down here. This is enclosing a very large area. And that ties in quite nicely with something that Phil's got at the end of the trench here. We think we've got a feature running in that direction. But until we get a section across that ditch, we can't tell what date it is. It might be nothing at all to do with the medieval period. It could be something much earlier.
And what's intriguing about this newly discovered enclosure is that it and what's inside it appear to be under, in other words earlier, than the medieval ridge and furrow ploughing.
Oh well, let's have a go. Carry on and we'll see what we get.
So as well as investigating it in Trench 1, we're opening a second trench further along its northern boundary. This morning, I thought this big field presented us with one of the easiest, most straightforward time teams we'd done in a long time. 9 hours later, I'm not so sure.
What the Royal Commission saw were two banks and a slightly hollowed area in the middle. And I think what has created one of the banks is this big stony feature running through here.
So a lot of our effort is now shifting to the area immediately around the standing Tudor manor house, as we try to find any previous buildings that may have stood on this site. The test pits are so close to the house because geophys have already eliminated an area further to the south that Stuart thought may contain a hendra, an early Welsh settlement. We're putting in a couple of trenches here because we'd expect an earlier manor to have a defensive wall and a gatehouse, because during medieval times, this was the wild Welsh West.
Isn't that wonderful? That looks very prehistoric, and it looks like it's tending more towards the Bronze Age than Iron Age. But let's have
I was going to say, let's have the local knowledge.
It's got to be Bronze Age, isn't it? Bronze Age, yeah.
That is stunning.
That's really something. I've never dug a piece of Bronze Age pot up in my life, and I've been digging over 50 years.
This pot suggests that people may have been living here during the Bronze Age. And when you consider the whole population of the UK 4,000 years ago was only about 200,000, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. But just as I'm beginning to think this is one of the most frustrating sights we've encountered in a long time, we make our first proper medieval find.
Gentlemen, I think that might interest you something.
Oh, that's a bit nice, isn't it?
This little coin is a major discovery because we suspect it dates to before the time of the current manor house.
That's a little penny, isn't it? Long cross? Long cross penny.
Got a cross on one side, hasn't it?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, because if you have a close look at it, there appears to be a cross on both sides.
Let me put my glasses on.
Look.
And would you believe it, it's not from the garden, it's from the Moat field that we dismissed as having nothing medieval in it. It's the beginning of day 3 of our dig in South Wales. And it's not just the weather that's taken a turn for the worse.
Have you started then?
Well, we'd like to start if you tell us where you'd like us to dig.
Well, you're there.
The mood's also darker amongst the diggers.
Yes, but it's a gap, you know, we can't dig it all.
In spite of our best efforts, we can't find any evidence of an earlier manor here at Llancaiach. But we're not giving up yet, even if it means we have to turn the whole garden upside down. Nigel, you've got a dendro date for us?
I have, and that date is AD 1548 to 1565.
1548 to 1565, and you're pretty certain about that?
Yeah, absolutely, it's black and white.
OK, thanks ever so much, mate. Bye. You murmured the word later. Yeah?
Well, yes, I mean, sort of all the things in the sort of commission volume suggesting around the 1530s, so 1548 to sort of a little bit later than we thought, but we, you know, got a date.
What does that date tell you about the house?
It tells us that the house is more old-fashioned than we thought, really.
And you've been looking after this house and doing all this reconstruction for ages, but you've never actually known how old the house was.
All we knew was around the 1530s. Well, you know, that's just fantastic to know. That's the thing, because we've never known.
With this date of roughly 1550, we've at least answered one of Diane's questions about Llancaiach. It also makes the coins we're finding in the next door field all the more intriguing, because they predate the standing house. As well as this fantastic find, we've also discovered coins that are over 100 years earlier than the current house.
Well, what you can say with absolute certainty is that people have been here for at least 4,000 years. And we do have a lot of ditches. They've been redug. They've been redug by hand. What is absolutely indisputable is that we've got one piece of early Bronze Age pot. That's going to take us back to about 2000 BC.
So thanks to Phil and his diggers' dogged determination, Diane has got a story to tell about this field. Just not the one she was expecting.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.